absolute pleasure to have you as part of C7 and particularly part of this workshop talking about how to be an effective ocean activist. I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes doing a little talk, and we'll also sort of do a few workshopy things where you can think about how this might apply also to some of the amazing work that you are all doing. A quick introduction to myself. So I'm Emily Penn. I'm a skipper and an ocean advocate. I have spent the last 12 years, a lot of my time at sea over those years, trying to tackle the issue of plastic pollution. And sort of became, I guess, an ocean activist without really meaning to. I actually trained as an architect, was very keen on having a career in architecture. And it wasn't until I lined up my first job in Australia and was started to look for ways to get there from England without taking an aeroplane, and ended up hitchhiking on a boat across the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And it was there I had this moment mid-Pacific when I went for my daily wash over the side of the boat and jumped in the water. And when I came up to the surface, I saw a toothbrush floating by, and then a cigarette lighter and a bottle top. And at the time, I was 800 miles from land. And it just didn't make any sense. What was this plastic doing out there? And most importantly, where was it coming from and how could we do something about it? And so that was the beginning for me 12 years ago. And it's been an amazing journey since, which has taken me to living on tiny little Pacific islands like this one here that unfortunately end up completely, washed up with plastic, and locals struggling to deal with a lot of their own plastic waste that they're now relying on because of the pressures on their local resources, and also to many years of sailing around the world, really studying this plastics issue and how we tackle it. So I'm going to share with you, firstly, some of the tips, I suppose, that I learned about, things I learned about being an ocean activist, things that no one ever taught me, but I kind of wish they had all those years ago, because I might have got to where I am now a little quicker. But I think one of my biggest learnings from actually being at sea for so many years was how you have to constantly react to what's changing around you. So the wind changes direction, the waves suddenly pick up, and you have to adjust your sails, you have to shift your course. And this was a huge learning point for me, where I actually realized that I too, in my own life, had to start reacting to what I was seeing and shift direction. And I found at school, I was always taught to have a goal and go for it, forgetting anything else. But life at sea taught me that actually the advantages of following the changes in the wind, looking upstream, upwind for the next storm, and being ready for it, and also not being afraid of not going towards the goal that you originally set, but being happy to actually take another path. Because like it is an open ocean, there's so many paths to take. And sometimes we can actually then leverage opportunities that appear along the way. So that would be my first big learning point, of making sure that you grab an opportunity when it comes. I then went on to study this plastics issue further, and we got out into the middle of one of these gyres, these accumulation zones, where we were actually expecting to find an island of plastic, maybe something that we could bring on board or send a big ship out and eventually clean up. But on the first day in the middle of the South Atlantic Gyre in 2010, when we got our nets out, this is what we pulled on board. And we found, a little bit of everything out there. But what was puzzling at the time is that actually there wasn't this huge island, and that 8 million tons were going into the ocean. And yet this is all we could find in the center of the accumulation zone. Now, it turned out that the rest of the plastic, it was there. We just hadn't seen it yet. And it wasn't until we built a manta trawl and dragged it across the surface of the ocean that we actually understood what was going on, and that there was this fine soup of microplastic particles covering the surface of our seas. And so I think this really showed me as well, not only to, not have this big blinkered goal of cleaning up islands, but really the importance of taking the time to look closely. And for me, that's really meant doing scientific research, understanding the problem, because I'm a big believer, like the great Einstein quote that says, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 59 minutes studying the problem and 1 minute solving it. And I'm not saying that we're going to solve any of these huge ocean challenges that we face in 1 minute, but the importance of actually understanding the problem you're trying to solve before tackling it is absolutely key, because otherwise we end up wasting time, wasting money and resource and other people's passion and energy trying to solve the problem in the wrong way that doesn't actually get to the crux of what we're trying to do. So doing the science, or whatever that might mean, understanding the problem was absolutely key part of the journey. And so for me, that ultimately led to, rather than cleaning up the ocean, it's all about prevention and turning off this tap, stopping the plastic at the source and stopping it from getting into the ocean in the first place. And so I then started to understand, what does that really mean, working at the source? And so started to look at all of these different layers that exist between the sea, where I was seeing the problem, and all the way up to the source where that problem begins. And I realized that actually it wasn't completely straightforward. And there are many grades here that we can kind of explore. We can catch the plastic to stop it, sort of minimize the damage and make this problem slightly less bad. We can convert it, and there's loads of technologies that are doing this today. We can turn plastic into energy. We can turn plastic into running shoes. We can give it a new life, but it'll still eventually end up as waste in the end. And so a lot of the energy that I've been spending the last couple of years is to drive change into the top two chambers of this sea to source spectrum. How do we close the loop? How do we work in the same way that nature does, in circles? And how do we actually avoid using plastic and these harmful materials altogether, so that we don't even need to worry about what happens down the rest of the chain? And ultimately, what I began to realize is that there's actually not one silver bullet solution. And I think naturally, as humans, we want to just find the one answer that we can wake up tomorrow and say, you just got to do this one thing and you'll solve the problem. But the reality is, while there's no silver bullet, the good news is there are hundreds of solutions, and they already exist, and they're things that we can get started on straight away. But it's a slightly trickier message to deliver, because it's not that nice, straightforward one. So part of our job as ocean activists and leaders in this space is to help people navigate what can be quite a challenging territory of working out which solution you use when. And so the way that I really like to approach this is, rather than everyone trying to do everything, we ask ourselves, well, what's the thing that I can do? What's the unique opportunity that I have? And this is certainly a question over the years that I've had to ask myself, knowing that we can't spread ourselves too thin. And also knowing that actually, to be able to go out there and get the experiences that we want, and for me that was to understand the problem, to sail across the oceans and see it firsthand, I needed something to offer. No one was going to just give me that opportunity. I had to basically work out, well, what can I trade? What's my skill set? Which for me was actually organizing things like expeditions. So I was the organizer and I got to go, and it got me my first foot in the door for getting out into the field and having those experiences. So whatever it is that you're brilliant at, it's so important to identify it and then put it out there as an offering. So to take that a little bit further, I sort of created this little picture here of thinking about your superpower. And we are looking for that sweet spot. What is it that you're really great at? because we all have a different skill, whether we're a writer or a filmmaker. So I encourage you all now to grab a piece of paper, to draw out this little diagram, and put what you're great at, what you love, and then what the world needs. And so that issue for me was plastic pollution, but we all have a different thing that we see when we look at the world, that we think, actually, I think we need more marine protected areas, or I think we need less fishing, whatever it might be. What does the world need? What do you love? And what are you great at? And have a think about those three things. And what you're looking for is a common theme, something that actually fits into all three of those circles. And if you can identify that sweet spot, it's going to give you so much power being an activist, because you will, not only want to jump out of bed every day because you love what you do, you'll also be solving a problem, and you'll be doing it better than other people because it's your skill set rather than someone else's. And if we can just focus on that, then we're going to go a long, long way to being a huge contributor to solving these problems. So I want to share a little tool with you that we made during lockdown when we couldn't be sailing around the world. That is something I'd love you all to take a look at, and also share it with others that maybe want to do something and they aren't too sure where to start. It's called the Shift platform. You can find it at shift.how, and it lists, for the plastics issue specifically, hundreds of these solutions that I'm talking about, all the different ways that we can be part of the solution. It orders them in that source to see spectrum that I mentioned earlier, and you can go and navigate them through the filters on the right hand side, and then find out more about each of these things, and it can kind of signpost you to where you need to go next. So please do go and check that out. The final little bits that I want to talk about are really the importance of also finding your like-minded tribe. I remember being, I was away for 3 years when I first set sail around the world, and I was quite worried about coming back to the UK because I felt like I wasn't going to be able to connect with people who I was the same as the ones that I was meeting around the world. And then I was amazed when I actually did get back to the UK and realize a completely new group of people existed that I managed to surround myself by. And surrounding yourself by brilliant, like-minded people is an absolute key part of becoming an activist, because you can then support one another and keep each other going in the tough times, and celebrate the good times as well. And so to finish up, a little tip about communicating with others. It's such an important part about being able to be a leader in this space, how you actually share your story. And I'm sure some of you have already tried to maybe talk to friends or colleagues about issues that you care about, and maybe come up against a brick wall from time to time where people, perhaps don't get it or don't see the world the same way you do. So we also need to be great persuaders and storytellers. And so I have a sort of 3-step trick that I use, whether I'm delivering a presentation on stage, or whether I'm having a 30-second slot on the news, or if I'm talking to someone that I bump into somewhere on the street. Part 1, how does it make you feel? This is the best way to grab somebody's attention. At the beginning of my talk, first thing I shared with you was my moment when I decided that I wanted to do something for our ocean. What was that moment for you? And how can you quickly share that with someone in a way that they might maybe resonate with that as well? So hit the emotion first. The second then is think. We've all got to be informed on the issue. I talked earlier about the importance of looking closely and understanding the problem. And that's really where this idea of thinking, informing, getting in the facts is such an important part. And then finally, act. There's no point in doing any of this if we're not going to help inspire others to then actually take action. Now, this last piece is the most dependent on your audience. Think about who you're talking to when you're talking about actions, because actions vary hugely depending on what people have an opportunity to do, whether it's the country they live in or maybe the role they have in society. Are they someone who has a lot of power because they work in government, say, and they can kind of change rules? Are they a business leader? Do they have an opportunity to change an industry? Or are they someone who works at your kid's school and they have an opportunity to lead the next generation? There's a huge number of different ways that we can act, as you can explore in that shift platform. And so make sure that that is tailored. So feel, think, act. If you can get those three things across in any communications you do, you're going to be going a long way to helping solve the problem. So we have got 9 minutes left. I can see that Louise, our amazing illustrator, who I'm sure you can find if you have a little scroll through on all of the faces and names on our Zoom call, she has been illustrating as we go. So you can actually pin that so you can take a look in these last 10 minutes at what she's been drawing and what she's adding as we finish up. We have got some time for questions. I also wanted to share one more resource with you, which I'm just going to leave on the screen while I'm answering questions, because you might like to jot it down or take a screenshot. But this is some of the questions that I ask myself when I'm starting a new project. And I've touched on these as I've gone through, or most of them, and I'm sure some of the others will come up in the questions. Ask yourself these 3 questions first, which we've talked about. What's my superpower? What is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And then, of course, what's your idea? What do you want to do about it? And then there's 5 things. I'm sorry, I can see that the key steps has got added under funding steps, but there's these 5 things at the bottom. You know, think about your goal, but don't be too obsessed with it. Surround yourself by brilliant people. Of course, funding is always something key. What do you need? What are your resources? And what are your key steps that are going to take you there? And so this is a great little cheat sheet for when you're starting a new project. Make sure that you've thought about all of these different things. So I want to have time for questions. Please do write them in the chat that you will find along the bottom of the screen. And I would love to hear a bit about what you have to say, any challenges that you come up against, you know, kind of where you're at, and anything else that you'd like to hear about this afternoon. Please do kind of fire away. And in the meantime, do grab a piece of paper and feel free to try and answer some of those questions. Great, we've got a question that's just come through from Joe. What's the most common advice you give to individuals, as in what action? Great question. So I think the sort of common denominator that works for most people in that sort of action section of communicating is probably to think about single-use plastic. How can we encourage people to minimize that plastic that they only use once and then throw away? And it's something that I think we can all relate to. It works as a message for kids, and it also works, you know, for all generations. Of course, I would always push anyone that has an opportunity to do more than just think about their own single-use plastic, to think about how they can take their impact up to the next level. We've got a question here from Diamond. What is the most practical skill that you have found has been most useful for you on your journey? Oh, I mean, I guess the obvious one is sailing. Just particularly my journey has obviously taken me across oceans, and that's something that I actually learned growing up. Only growing up, I kind of learned in that sort of bathtub size sailing boat with a little handkerchief for a sail. Nothing quite like the ocean going vessels I've been on recently. But it's, you know, the best way that you actually can learn to sail, because it's the least forgiving, as in if you get it wrong, you just tend to tip over. So you learn quite quickly. So that was definitely a great practical skill that I'd sort of have to mention. Solomon is asking, how do you start getting into something like conservation and reducing plastic after university, especially if you're low on cash? Great question, and very much the position I was in when I was wanting to get to the other side of the world, but not have any funds to do it. I ended up finding a project and getting a job. It wasn't a paid job, but it was a job that gave me a place on a boat and a trip, you know, that I could go on. And I had to work really hard every day to get that opportunity. And the way I did, kind of going back to something I touched on earlier, was thinking about what I could offer. And this is probably one of the biggest bits of advice I could give to anyone leaving university right now, looking for more experiences, is when you find something that you want to do, rather than writing to that person and saying, can you help me with this thing? Write to them and tell them what you can do for them. I'm a photographer. Can I come and take some pictures of your event? Or I'm a writer. Can I come and follow you and blog about what you're doing? Or, you know, the list goes on and on. You know, I can make amazing Instagram stories. Can I come and help document what you do? There's so many things that you can do that are so valuable to others and that'll gain you the experience that you're looking for. So just flip it into an offering and it'll be really hard for that person to then refuse. We've got another question here about a project to clean up the local river and green spaces. What can I do for things like funding? So funding, you know, a super common question because it is the thing that we all come up against. Some things to think about. Are there any ways that you can actually kind of generate revenue from what you're trying to do? As an example, when I was living down in New Zealand, we did a lot of cleanups on local rivers and local spaces, and we turned it into a bit of an event. And so we actually, you know, we partly raised some sponsorship to be able to get some of the equipment that we needed. We also managed to get a lot of things donated, and one of those things was beer and wine for an after party, which we then sold at $1 a drink in the after party. And we had all these amazing people turn up. We did this great cleanup. We had a great party afterwards, and we managed to get some funds back that covered the costs of the whole event. So you can think of it creatively, and I would definitely encourage you to say, look at ways that you can actually creatively bring in revenue where people don't mind spending a little bit, especially if they're having a really good time. And then, of course, there's looking at grants, foundations, and corporate sponsorship. And again, with corporate sponsorship, rather than just asking for money, tell them what you can do for them as a business and offer them some exposure to how many people are going to show up. Can you get yourself on the local radio? You know, are there other things that you can do that means that those brands will get some exposure as well? And if you flip the offer around, then you'll find that people are actually wanting to get involved and give you a little bit of cash to help you do it. I always find once you get the first thing's the hardest, and building momentum is key to then scale up. So don't try and go too big too soon. Get one thing going, prove you can do it, and then go for the big one after that. Okay, as a young person, I struggle to get people to listen to me and value what I'm talking about. Do you have any advice to change this? It's definitely a tricky question, something I too have experienced over the years. I think, you know, being able to demonstrate the value that you can bring and the experiences that are unique that you have are definitely really key. And then keeping on building on that experience so that you have that kind of authority and credibility as well. There are people out there, you know, who just also won't listen, and don't be demoralized if that happens. I always think there's this sort of 20-20-60 rule where 20% of the people, probably like you guys on the call, have already got it covered. We know, you know, we've got it together and we want to do something, and you don't really need to worry about that 20%. You've then got another 20% who might never listen, and they just might not ever get it, or at least not anytime soon. So don't worry about that group either. But there's this 60% that kind of want to know and want to do something, but they're not really sure where to start or you know, what sort of the next step. So don't be demoralized if you get somebody in that middle 20%, because it's absolutely, there's so many other people out there who will want to hear something too. We've actually got very close to the end now. I wonder if there's anything else I can quickly see in here. That there's someone asking about speech writing, and can't really think of anything to write, just wondering how people do it. In fact, for me, from my experience of trying to write speeches, the only way I've really been able to do it is being forced into the moment of having to kind of stand up on stage in front of a group of people, and then working out for that audience, you know, what is it that I want to say. And I started out by doing hundreds of kind of free school talks at the beginning. And over that process of doing it again and again and again, I started to really kind of figure out, you know, the sort of the best turns of phrases and the best way to communicate, watching people's faces, seeing what really resonated with them. So you might not have to book a bunch of school talks, but just trying things out with your friends, with your family, with your colleagues, to sort of explore how you share the story. That's probably my best advice, rather than sitting down with a blank piece of paper. I've never been any good at that. Get out there, start talking to people, see what works. When you get a phrase that works, jot it down. And kind of build it from there. Also, have a great slideshow if you're doing a formal talk, and then just talk to the pictures and make sure that you've thought very carefully about all of your images that you share, and the points that you want to then get across that speak to those images, and suddenly you'll find that it flows. We are 2 minutes past the end of the session, so I'm going to wrap up now, so that you can get on to some of the other amazing events that are happening as part of C7. Thank you so much for all joining today and your amazing questions. I'm sorry I haven't quite got to all of them. I feel like we could go on all afternoon discussing this topic, but please do feel free to reach out and get in touch. You can find my website, which is my name, Emily Penn, and of course the Shift platform that I mentioned earlier, and everything is linked from there. So feel free to reach out on social media and connect there. Well, I wish you all luck in everything that you're going on to do. I hope that today has been helpful to you all in some way, and enjoy the rest of this amazing afternoon and evening that Finisterre have lined up. And yeah, I look forward to connecting with some of you in the future. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.